Hi, I'm Ron.
And I'm Don.
And this is the Ron and Don Show. Very excited to bring you the third in a three-part series show on tile floor repair and restoration, most specifically to quarry tile floors, and even more specific to the replacement of the grout using the Laticrete epoxy grout products. Laticrete is our sponsor in this, and we thank them very much for their participation.
Let's go back and talk about briefly what we've done in the first two parts of this. First part was really about the problems involved with particularly quarry tiles. We talked a little bit about all kinds of flooring in there, but more about problems with quarry tile and the old solutions that were used that really didn't work. The second episode is about how we have come up with and changed the method of grouting floors and what we expect as a much longer life and a much better end product. This episode will talk specifically of how you do the work, how the contractor will do the work. And you've already been, if you've been through the second episode, you know how the bidding should move forward. You've got all that information. We're ready to get started with the tools and materials. And we've unpacked one package of Laticrete product here. These three items make a unit for Laticrete. It says SpectraLOCK across the top of part C, but what we really look at is on the bags. It's SpectraLOCK 2000 IG. That is the enhanced grout epoxy product that we're going to be using. If you use regular SpectraLOCK epoxy, it will not do the job that this will do. That's a lower grade epoxy, good for lots of purposes. Front entrances of your restaurant, just fine for it, but it will not stand up to kitchen. SpectraLOCK 2000 IG is what we're talking about here, and these are the three main components for that process. We're going to talk about all these products and how they're specifically used in this part, and you're going to talk a little bit about how we're going to get started in the work.
Well, first and foremost, from a contractor perspective and for the happiness and peacefulness of everybody involved, there is nothing more important than proper dust control. Once this project gets started, if we're not encapsulating and capturing that dust in some kind of a mechanical system, we're going to have it all throughout the restaurant, and that is not good.
So barrier walls are very important. Also covering equipment with plastic and other methods of protecting the dust from getting on things is very important. I suggest if you're working in the kitchen, you run the hood while you're doing this to capture the dust and take it out of the restaurant so it doesn't migrate into the dining room. Another little thing is make sure that the restaurant staff have removed all of the smallwares and items from the work area and making sure all the food has been removed from all the refrigerators, which may be unplugged for the time that they're working in those areas. So getting it set up for success is critical. The first step after that and moving quickly with your crews will be to get the floor clean that you're working on. That means getting in there, and you'll see the pictures that are showing right now of the crew in there with lots of degreaser and hot water and squeegees and cleaning that floor thoroughly. That hot water serves two purposes. One, it helps get all the grease off of the floor, but it also starts warming the floor, which will make the product cure quicker. Second part of that is to rinse it thoroughly at that point and get ready for the mechanical stage of prepping the floor.
Okay, so now we've got a clean floor and we're ready to start cutting the existing grout. Take a look at this photo. What you'll see here is what we call a perimeter cut. You pick out an area that you want to work in for the period of time you're in the restaurant, and you cut the perimeter, as this photo shows. You'll also notice the dust containment and collection system that's in place, and ultimately what we're doing here is we're going to saw cut to a full depth, being careful not to cut through any membrane that may be underneath the tile. And that's more specifically located in environments where you've got a floor that is not necessarily on grade. It could have a parking garage below it. It could be a multi-story building, things like that. So you want to make sure that the depth of your cut is not to the degree that it's going to be a detriment to that membrane.
If you have a floor that's on grade and you don't have a membrane, and let's say they had let this regrouting go way too long and you had no grout left in that grout joint, then you really still need to scratch the concrete slab underneath, because that is holding grease down there and you need to get rid of the grease. Grease and detergent are bond breakers and will destroy the capability of holding the grout in the grout joint. We talked about that in part 1 and 2. One of the other key factors here that he just talked about is the perimeter cut. The perimeter cut needs to be wherever you're stopping the grouting, and it may not be the full field of the floor, and at that point you need to make a proper seal between the new grout and the old grout, so you'll do a ramping cut up from the bottom of the tile up to the level of the existing grout, and we can then float grout in on top of that and seal that grout joint so water and grease and stuff will not get underneath our new grout, and it will bind to that cut grout that is nice and clean. Now we're ready to go on to the second floor cleaning using hot water and detergents and deck brushes and squeegees just like the first one, but this time we have to really rinse that thoroughly clean and get it absolutely no detergent, no grease, and use a wet vac as necessary to pull up the residual water.
Okay, so now that that's done, the next item is to address the broken or missing floor tiles that may exist in this area of rework. At this point, it's time to start addressing the damaged or missing floor tiles in the area that you're working in. So those floor tiles, as you'll see in this graphic, need to be saw cut and removed themselves.
You could be doing this even while you're doing the prior steps of cleaning and saw cutting with another crew. It all depends on how you schedule the work. The larger repairs, you're going to be 8, 10, 15 tiles or more. You're going to be using a product from Laticrete that's number 254R Premium as the setting adhesive. This takes a little longer to cure, an hour or so before you can get on it with grout, maybe a little longer depending on the temperature of the floor. So in using that product, sometimes some of the contractors in the past have chosen to do those repairs and get the new tile down, and then they just cover it with boards for the night, and then that'll be part of tomorrow night's grouting. For smaller repairs, or if you're, let's say you have 6, 7 tiles, they have another product that is very aggressive epoxy that's really made for holding stone to the outside of buildings and things like that. It's 310R, Laticrete 310R. Don't mix that up and go decide you need to go get a cigarette. You're gonna come back and it'll be set. You put this on the back of the towel, you cannot trowel it onto the floor. It will not trowel, it's too thick. You just butter the back of the tiles and set them in place, and in 15 minutes you're grouting right over it. It'll set sufficiently to do so. Don't be walking on them for the first 20 or for first half hour to an hour, but you can kneel on them while you're grouting and all that kind of stuff. You just don't want them to rock. Now, because you cannot trowel this down the floor, when you're grouting after using 310, you need to really work the grout in hard, because you may have some areas at the bottom of the tile where the adhesive is not, and the grout will slump into that and fill that. So you need to force that grout down in there to fill that. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a grout profile that you're going to have to come back and address again to raise it up to the proper height. Either one of these can be grouted the same night. You may find it easier to delay on larger ones and make that part of the second night's grouting. Saw cut the whole rest of the area around the repair that you've completed, clean it all up, cover it with a board, and the next day all you got to do is your second clean real fast and start grouting.
But the value of both of these products is the fact that they kick quickly, and you can, in fact, grout those areas after a short time of cure.
That's correct.
Okay, so as far as the regrouting process itself, you're ready to get started in this designated work area. The only thing you've got to make sure of is while the grout lines can be a little bit wet, we don't want standing water there. So as long as we're to the point where we don't have pools of water, it's time to start grouting.
You need to have, at this point, made sure that you're following your timelines very carefully. Because once you mix these products up, you're going to then be on a clock that is, you can't do things faster than they will allow you. Depending on the temperature of the floor and the temperature of these products, it'll determine how quickly they will set up and come to a state where you can clean them and then eventually skin over till you can cover them. And the websites for Laticrete, there are very specific cure times for these products by temperature. That's why that hot water was very important when you're cleaning to warm up the floor. I have had people take these bags in the middle of winter and put them in buckets of warm water, 90, 100 degree water to warm them up, because when they're warm, it'll help make the cure faster. But that also cuts down the pot time, or how much time you can have in the bucket with the product before it hardens in the bucket. So again, once you mix this product, you're in production mode. You mix one full one of these with one full one of these in a bucket, and you get 100% out of these things. Fold them in half with a corner cut and scrape them over the edge of the bucket and get everything out of those two. Quickly mix these up until they are thoroughly mixed. You add in one full one of these. Never try and say, well, I'm going to use half of this and half of that and half of that. You don't know. This may be a ½ ounce more in weight than this. You don't have scientific scales to measure this stuff out. You need to completely mix up a full unit every time, even if it's a small area. What you have those two mixed together, you add this in and mix at 450 degree revolution, high-speed drill for about 2 minutes. It'll get fluffy and smooth and be easier to mix, but it needs to be rotated at a high speed. So a high-speed drill, make sure everything you're using to mix these, the buckets, the mixing blade, the whole 9 yards, are absolutely clean. Don't contaminate this product. It's too expensive to start over. Once it's mixed, you can leave it in the bucket, but it's going to cure somewhat in the bucket as you're using it, or you can just pile a bunch on the floor and start the process with the float. Now the float is something that you have to have a very specific technique in getting all that product down into the grout joint.
And this is quite a workout too.
Yeah, you're going to use 2 hands on that float when you're first putting it on the floor. Then you're going to take that float and diagonally cut across the tiles in order to clean the grout off tiles, because you don't want to leave any grout on top of the tiles. This is expensive product. You want every bit of it to go into the grout joints. And you keep going until you used up another one, the unit completely. You might have another crew that's doing the mixing and have it mixed, so you can just keep on going to whatever's cleaned after the saw cutting. This product will cure in somewhere, or will set for about 20 minutes at 70 degree floor temperature before you're ready to start your cleaning. When you're ready to clean, you have in the container with it 2 packages of cleaning chemicals that go into the water. One of them's for the first clean, the other one's second clean. They're absolutely identical. You can use the second clean for the first clean. The first doesn't matter. They've just made it so it's easier to understand. The grout is set for at least 20 minutes, and gently, very gently, move it around as I'm moving here, just barely touching it, and the amount of water you have on the floor plus this will lift the grout off of the tile face. Water, once you have the grout in the joint, is your friend. It's not a dehydration cure, it is a chemical cure. So the water will not hurt the grout joint at all. In fact, it'll help you somewhat. Once you have it all loosened up and it's floating, the surface product is floating in suspension, you're going to have a bath towel that you dunk in the water, wring it out so it's still damp, throw it way out and drag it back. When you drag it back, it will pull up most of the surface and drag it back diagonally across the tiles. Generally, one time across the tiles is enough. If not, turn it over and drag it over a second time, and that will keep that grout profile nice and high. If you use a sponge, you will take out product and the grout profile will be dropped down too low. And if I'm in charge, I'm going to make you come back and redress all those grout joints. Be sure that you're wearing gloves throughout this whole process, and some people will need to be wearing face masks, and there are people that are allergic to this product, and they can't even be in the building. So make sure that the contractor knows his staff and whether or not they can use these products. After 90 minutes, another 90 minutes, you can go back for a second wash and you do the procedure exactly the same way you did for the first one. Gently scrub the top of the tiles with the doodle bug scrub pad, whatever you want to call it, and then use your towels to diagonally go across the top of it, and that should take any haze that will develop off of the tile. After that, you got about an hour, depending on the temperature of the floor, and these are all temperature dependent, before you can think about covering the floor. Now, you will see a very slight skin develop on the grout, and when that happens, you can start putting down protection for the floor itself. In the dish area where you have detergents, sanitizers, and waters that are going to run on the floor, you need to put down some plastic over the floor and then put your boards down over that. Around drains, again, you will put down plastic around the drains, put down the boards, and just cut a hole for the drain itself. This is to keep detergents and grease off of the grout, because that will damage the cure of the grout. It will never get as hard as you want it to get, and it will never be as good of a grout job. It takes 2 or 3 days for the grout to not be stained also by products. Now, the boards themselves will absorb grease, and will absorb water, and it'll never get through them. You put the boards down, and the boards I know you use a different product.
We use a ram board, yes.
A ram board, it can be a masonite with the shiny side down, it can be 1/4 inch Luan, whatever you want to use. Use like Gorilla Tape to tape the edges very well so that other mop water can't migrate underneath the edges of the boards where you have stopped the grouting. And also all the seams need to be taped down. If you really need to, you can drive some cut nails or some concrete nails through the boards, down into the substrate, through a grout joint, and just come back and touch up that grout joint at a later time. But you need to make sure that those boards are absolutely stable, will not move when they're walking and even rolling things across them.
Let me interject here too. One of the life lessons learned in this process right at this phase is that while that may have a hazy glaze over the top of the surface, you can still track that stuff into your shoe treads and track it all over the restaurant, and that is a real problem. So the work crews need to be aware of that and be very careful about walking out of the kitchen once they've done this process.
Or even walking on other parts of the floor. So this stuff sticks, and it sticks hard. And you ought to consider strongly that no one walks on the grouted surfaces until it's time to work the surface itself. And that's where your cleaning crews may have some problems. You may have to come up with solutions for how the cleaning crews that are cleaning the restaurant, if they're there at 4 o'clock in the morning, get through. Your work windows, the hours that you have set up to work, you have to schedule out and know when you cannot lay new grout down, because the cure time to when the boards go down will be exceeded. Restaurant staff are going to come in 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and they have to start working then. You can't say, oh, it'll be an hour before we're going to lay the boards down. You have to manage when you put product down to make sure that you're ready for them when they are scheduled to arrive.
Critical path scheduling is very important in this process so that the opening crews are able to get in and do what they need to do to get the restaurant open. I'd also like to mention too that Don touched on it a few minutes ago. When you mix these products, they need to be mixed in their entirety. No half bags, half pouches, or anything like that. So what that's ultimately probably going to mean by the end of the evening is that the last batch that's mixed up doesn't get used entirely. So it's very important that the contractor that's doing this work have a plan in place to dispose of these products and the buckets and whatever else is used in the process of installing in an appropriate manner. Don't throw this stuff in the dumpster. That's not where it belongs.
Also, when you're dealing with rinsing out of tools and buckets, that should never go down the mop sink drain. The water you use to do the first and second rinse of the tile, you can put it down the mop sink drain as long as you have lots of cool water running from the tap there to flush it down through the sewer system and out into the city sewer immediately so that any residue doesn't get plugged up. You don't want to dig up a sewer pipe and clean it out. So allow no solid material ever to go down any of the plumbing in the restaurant, nor out in the storm drains either. The city catches you, you're gonna be paying a ton of money.
Okay, so you've heard a lot of complex stuff here. Even though it sounds incredibly complex, if you've never dealt with epoxy grouts before, you can get through it, and there is a process, and there is some history, and there are a lot of folks that know how to use this stuff properly. There's also some great training programs that Laticrete specifically has with the use or for the use of these products. So don't be scared away, because the end result is that the restaurant is in a much better place with this stuff in between their grout lines than they would be with an otherwise latex cement-based grout product. So
I specifically thank Laticrete for participating in this with us and for all their help over the years to me personally in getting this whole process started.
thank you. I'm Ron.
And I'm Don.
This is the Ron and Don Show. Thanks for joining us today. Please subscribe. Also check out our website. We've referenced a lot of materials here. They're all on our website, as well as a direct link to Laticrete themselves. Please subscribe.